Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas. I'm going to be your host today, and this is episode 280, where we're going to be talking about getting creative with your strategy. Now, we all know the importance of developing a marketing strategy for your game, and the idea of leveraging strategies that worked for other successful games can be very tempting. However, doing this can potentially limit how you stand out, making it even more of a challenge to market your game. Thankfully, Joe Henson of Indie Game Joe joins us today to share how his journey and processes help him look at things differently so he can think outside of any shape and come up with creative strategies that stand out. So that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey everybody, and we're back, and today with me I have Joe Henson from Indie Game Joe. Joe, how's it going, bud?
It's going very, very well, thank you. The UK is currently having a second heat wave.
No!
So, yeah, it's I know as Brits like to complain about the weather, but it's pretty hot, so just coping with that at the moment.
I'm over here on the Northeast in the U.S., and we just got out of ours today. You have no idea how happy I have been to open a window and not have the AC on. I was telling my wife, it was so, between the rain and how hot it was, I felt like I was on some foreign planet where I could barely breathe walking outside and I was just trapped inside my home.
Oh.
And then, of course, people are like, well, what about the winters? Because you're trapped in your home then, too. I'm like, yes, but that's, at least I feel cozy being in my home and during winter.
No, yeah.
But anyway, so I'm sorry that you're going through that heat wave. And hopefully...
Well, we don't have any, AC
that's
or
right,
anything like
yes.
that. We're not prepared like a lot of countries, so it's the inevitable. It's just getting hotter in general. So, but we're just not prepared for it. It's like literally, I think 3 weeks ago we had a record heat wave. It got to 40 degrees, and then the next day, I'm not even joking, it was like 19 degrees. So like, there's no time to acclimatize. It's just extreme, then suddenly extreme, and we're just we don't have time to adapt. Before that, like over a long time, it just suddenly comes out of nowhere. So, but yeah, that's my little English moan.
Fair enough, understandably so. Well, hopefully, when people are listening to us today, that it's found, you have found time to cool off, and it's cooled off for you and everything else, because that is definitely not fun. And I'm sure a lot of us share your pain, and that when they're listening to this, they can hopefully feel rest assured that you're cooling off and it's much cooler in the UK.
Yep.
All right, great. Well, thanks for letting us know how you're doing and how you're coping with all this. But that aside, I'd love for you to kind of introduce yourself a little bit more, like what you do for Indie Game Joe, and when you're not working and helping games, what do you do in your spare time? What kind of hobbies or fun things do you do to kind of unplug from stuff?
Well, we'll go back a little bit in time, because I think it'll be an important thing to mention. This is that so to start things off, my name, as you said, is Joe Henson, and I am a full-time marketing consultant at my own company, Indie Game Joe. The bulk of my work is with a company called Digital Cyber Cherries. You may have heard of Hypercharge, the game, which has gone all kinds of things viral the last month. We'll get into that, I'm sure. But before I started or became Indie Game Joe, I was a painter and decorator.
Oh, okay.
I left school at 15. Joined, I think, literally 2 weeks after leaving high school. I had no we call them GCSEs, grades. Had no GCSEs and lack of confidence and whatnot, and just thought, the family business. So I thought that was the only thing I could really do. However, I always had a passion for games and a real love for communities and fan websites. Like, I'm a very emotional, sensitive person. I think what's made me good at my job in certain aspects like community management and understanding, a certain target, not a target audience, is because I can put myself in another shoes, so to speak. So I did that up until, and this will be a too long didn't read type moment, but up until 15 to about, yes, till I was 15 and then to about 29. You imagine that timeline there. I would use every second I had spared, run to my to my bedroom from mum and dad's house. I'd start making fan websites for some of my favorite games like Left 4 Dead, Homefront, loads of more games, smaller indies as well. And I'd start learning how to market them. And I'd start learning how to develop and maintain communities. And I just started to realize I loved games and I really loved the community aspect. And it was so exciting just seeing sort of, not that I looked at it as numbers, but seeing something you build together with community grow together. And I started to realize I was quite good at that, had a bit of a knack for it. So then fast forward a bit more, again, if you imagine in that timeline from 15 to 29, I began to get emails from developers from these fan websites I'd made who were really impressed with my work ethic, and they appreciated the fan sites and communities, because I helped a lot of games with the Kickstarters, building up things at the time, Steam groups when that was new, building up forums V-Billiton forums when that was a big thing then. I made some real good big communities, and I made friends with some some people from I say friends got in touch with them on Steam friends that add me on there. Speak to them occasionally on email. They'd even join our fan websites, and I would actually be in contact with them a lot. So it was at that time I didn't realize, but it was what we call networking. And I talked to them a lot about advice about game development. I was diving a bit more into that, and then just marketing as a whole and whatnot. And I just got so much good information, met a lot of nice people. And fast forward and even further, I made a fan website for a game that I really loved, a zombie game called Contagion, which went on to sell, I think, over 1 million copies on Steam. And the founder of that saw the work I was doing, was impressed, and offered me my first sort of official role in the industry as a PR and marketing sort of assistant, although I did quite a lot more. So for the next few years, that was my, again, real industry sort of insight under the hood, seeing what it's like in the engine of everything that goes on in game design and marketing. I got to meet more developers who were hands deep into it. And from there, I was still obviously decorating, spending every second I had spare, working on these fan websites, working on the marketing for this game, learning more, networking again. And that just went on for a few years until the friends who I met from that game, we all banded together and decided to make our own video games, do our own thing, and formed basically our own studio, indie dev studio called Digital Cybercherries. And then Hypercharge was born, and a few other games we made. And then it got to about, fast forward even more. Sorry, it's going to be all messy because it's quite a messy story.
No
fast forward even more. I kept working on Hypercharge in my spare time, struggling, full-time job. And to be honest, Andrew, it was like a full-time job doing the marketing for the Hypercharge and the other games we launched, and a little bit of consultancy here and there. It was I couldn't really say it was my official full-time job, because it wasn't, but in terms of the effort and the time, literally it was my life. If you account for the hours that I put in. So it got to about 2020, obviously COVID hit. We had the launch, we left early access in 2020 on Hypercharge. We launched on Nintendo Switch in 2020 as well. So don't mean in a don't know the word for it, in a bad way, but COVID for us was a blessing in disguise, because, well, for myself, because it meant I had more time to really focus my skills and my expertise and experience into those games. And then it was just obviously COVID, the business side of decorating, that wasn't a thing. Nobody was allowed to work. We're all at home. But it meant I realized that was the time for me to leave the family business and focus on marketing, what I really love. So I am involved in game design a lot. It's not just marketing, but marketing has always been my forte. So in 2020, that's when I officially started Indie Game Joe. So that's kind of the timeline. I hope it makes sense of how I've tried. It's a lot longer, but I've tried to summarize it the best I can. But that's how I got to the position where I am now. So it's been one heck of a roller coaster, an emotional ride to get where I am. You'll know, Andrew, marketing isn't just people see the results and think it's instantaneous. Their perception is that you've just got there, but they don't see what it took to get there.
Yep.
And that's kind of my story of who I am and what Indie Game Joe is.
So I'm going to call this out to everybody listening. Yes, that wasn't our typical introduction. However, I am so thankful and grateful that Joe shared that with us today, because a lot of times I know some of us struggle with the idea of probably imposter syndrome, or I don't have a background in doing this stuff, whether it's development or marketing. And who's to think that, Joe's background was, started as a painter in a family business. It's crazy if you think about it, but it happens all the time. And it's important to be aware that just because of your background, as long as you have a real good focus and understanding and probably a lot of other factors and a little bit of luck, these things can happen. And I'm sure we could probably talk about this way more in detail, probably maybe a follow-up episode, because again, I think there's a lot to unpack there from that story, but definitely appreciate you sharing that with us, because again, it just goes to show that you can make your own opportunities is the way I like to look at things and stuff. So, and I think what's also really cool about Joe sharing that story is simply how it's actually going to carry into our conversation, which we're going to get into in a moment. But before we do that, so Joe, you've worked a lot. You finally are able to do this full time and everything. You had practically 2 full-time jobs, family business and your own and stuff. What do you do to unplug?
So, I do, where I live, there's a real nice big forest, literally a 30-second walk away from me. So I like to do a lot of walks with my partner. And I do a lot of weightlifting in my spare time as well, just to release that energy. And that's basically it. Lots of walks, training. I've got like a little home gym just in the garage. And that's where I sort of sweat all the demons out.
I love it. No, that's great, and I think that's important, just to take that time to do those things. And yeah, exercise is a big one. I try to get as much as I can in. Lately it's been biking, but no, that's cool. Like the walks and stuff. And what you said, you live in the woods, right, or in a wooded area.
So literally, there's it's actually, we call it in England, it's classed as an ancient woods. So it's one of the oldest woods in England, and I'm literally just right at the back of it. This is really amazing, and it's huge. So there's so many different walks you can plan and do.
That's awesome. Well, yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little jealous. We have woods here, but those sound way cooler than I think. I would have to do quite a bit drive to get to anything that ancient. But well, that's good. I'm glad you spend the time to really unplug and have found cool ways to do that. All right. Well, now that we got to know something about you, we want to get a little bit more familiar in a very random way, and that is with the Q-Box round. And for those of you who aren't familiar, the Q-Box round is simply just a series of random questions I prepared for Joe here. And Joe, are you ready?
Yes, I am.
Excellent. If you could practice any kind of martial art or trained combat, what would it be?
I am a boxing fan, so I'd have to say boxing. Although I wouldn't like to get hit, and I wouldn't like to hit somebody, but I'd like to try it. I just like watching it,
All right, awesome. Boxing. Crayons, colored pencils, or Sharpies?
I'd have to say crayons because it resonates more with my childhood, and it just makes me feel good.
Nice. One country you always wanted to travel to.
So I've never been to Italy, and I've always wanted to go to Italy, so it'd have to be there.
All
So
right.
I really want to try the ice cream and the pizza.
Ooh, there you go. Nice. If you could speak another language you don't know fluently, what would it be?
I want to learn Italian.
That's a very appropriate answer.
Yeah.
And last but not least, a staple here on the show. What game are you playing now?
Oh, so I haven't been playing many games for a while, but I've recently, and I'm not a sweat lord, but I got back into Call of Duty Warzone. So I'm playing
Ah,
that quite a bit at the moment. But again, I'm not a sweat lord.
yep. Nice. Well, thank you so much for giving those answers, and so we can learn a little bit more about you. But now that we've done that, I'd love for us to get into this conversation, which is getting creative with your strategy. Because, again, strategy is so important in what we do with marketing, games, and everything else. So I'd love to kind of kick this off with, there's lots of information about how to execute particular marketing strategies and even tactics, but no strategy is essentially a one size fits all. I mean, I'm sure we could both agree with that. So, knowing this, what's the best way for a studio or dev to approach any strategy they think is worth pursuing?
So my advice would be, and something I do a lot in practice, is more often than not, you won't know obviously which strategy will work unless you try it. And we mentioned it earlier that I do have this personal belief where a lot of indies see it all the time. I feel a bit sorry for them sometimes where they get so bogged down in data and numbers. Now I'm not saying none of that's a bad thing, but if you want to, it's about being creative, and to be creative, you have to be bold. You have to be a bit daring. You have to try new things. Like if you have an idea, but you're a little bit unsure for whatever reason, it might not work. Obviously, there's boundaries. Don't do something, that's really stupid type thing, which will get you in trouble. If you say something really silly, is what I mean. But if we talk about it in simple terms, it's about thinking outside the box and be understanding that a strategy may not. If a strategy doesn't work, it doesn't mean that you can't learn something from it. So again, that's how I look at it to sort of answer your question, is to be creative and be bold enough to try new things, because that's exactly what I do. I never get too bogged down with the numbers or the analytics. For example, what works for another game may not work for yours, and vice versa. Um, if that makes sense.
No, I mean, I would say absolutely, because I think your points are valid in terms of you're really thinking of you might be familiar with certain strategies and things out there, and then we can get caught in and swept up with, hey, this worked really well for someone, and then find out, oh, it's not working and stuff. So being mindful of, like you said, being mindful of testing new things, or being aware to them to a degree, and knowing, hey, it could work, it might not, or
Yeah.
whatever, and keeping that open mind, like you were saying.
And I think the biggest thing to point out as well is also I say marketing is an adventure, and what I mean by that is there's hurdles, there's obstacles, there's the unknown. You may get lost, but it doesn't mean you can't have fun with it in the process. So if you can have fun doing it, and I think marketing video games can be very fun, it inspires creativity. It
Mm.
sort of ignites it, and that's the biggest thing. Try and have fun with it, and yeah, I keep repeating myself. I think it's so important. Just be. I've got a funny saying. People say, I said it earlier, think side out of the box, but I think no, that's unoriginal. Think outside the circle. Create your own shape.
There you go.
Just try. Try things like that. It's very important to read. But Andrew, this. We're all students in this industry. We're all
Yes,
learning together.
absolutely.
And the biggest thing I've learned, particularly in video game marketing, is that we never stop learning. It's an evolving product or an evolving sort of beast that keeps changing and changing and changing. So don't just stick to one thing and think that is just it. Keep trying different things.
Nice. Yeah, no, really great points. And I kind of want to shift the conversation a little bit because I'm sure you could agree too with me here in terms of like the importance of like setting expectations and some guidelines too, because I'm sure a lot of us know that, hey, all about maybe trying new things and stuff, but to an extent, we can only do so much of that. So expectation guidelines can be pretty important. So let's say before getting creative with any type of strategy, how can working from an initial plan help you with looking for creative ideas later?
So the initial plan obviously gives you an idea of how you wish to market your game. But could you rephrase the question? Sorry again. I
Yeah,
want to make sure
sure.
I answer it
Like,
answer it the
is
best I
it
can.
important to have an initial plan before you start getting like all sorts of like trying to think like outside of the circle immediately, for example?
Yeah. So I think, like, for example, we say, let's just say, I think a good analogy would be you're a one man band type thing. As just you're a solo indie dev, and you want to do a bit of marketing, and then I think it's good to have some initial idea of where you want to go and how you can apply them later. For example, things like what social platforms would be best for your to showcase your game. This is all dependent on the type of target audience who are playing it. Is it going to be kids? Is it going to be adults? What's the demographic? So certain things we get kind of into a little bit. I think what do we call it again? Competitive analysis, I think it is, or that type of research. But I do advise devs don't get too bogged down with that. But yeah, it's definitely important to have an idea. But I would caution of getting too laser focused on it, because then it could put you off from being creative as well. I think having a rough and clear idea of what you want to do with your strategy beforehand is very good, because then as you get deeper into the development of your game, it can maybe give you new ideas, or maybe for the marketing, and maybe you realize actually this initial idea may not be the best plan now because this has changed. Because I always say game development and marketing are very integral to each other. They need each other in the sense of the marketing is the game as well. So whatever changes in the game as a developer, the marketing it's beneficial if it changes with it.
No, good points. And I kind of want to dive into this idea a little bit more too, because I'm curious. Would you say, as you're creating this initial plan, these initial ideas, and let's say starting to execute, do you think it's also essential to start coming up with maybe some best practices or at least a level of consistency? And then based off that, then you can kind of think more outside of the box or the circle, let's say.
So I think, could you say it again? Sorry, please.
That's all right. Well, I'm just wondering if it's like you have this initial plan. Is it still really good to, let's say, have a level of consistency to try out first, and then from that you might learn more to start kind of like shaping how you to be creative in different ways with what you with kind of like a baseline, if you will.
So sorry, are you saying it's just it's the context that's throwing me off a little bit? That's my end. So I apologize. So are you saying a level of consistency in terms of the implementation of a strategy?
Yes. Like you have a rough idea, you have is it good to work with consistency first, or just to try a few things here, try a few things there, something like that?
I'm with you. Okay, so it's definitely good to follow almost what I call a basic roadmap of certain ifs, do's and don'ts. So, for example, things like having um, when you announce some news, always have a call of action ready.
Yep.
Um, if you have certain how are you going to promote your game? What is the hook? Is the hook going to be through a GIF, a video, through the copy? So there's that consistency there which you follow. I think is important, but in the same breath, it's also again wise to get a little bit out your comfort zone and do something a little bit out of the norm from what was consistent before. So
Mm.
the consistency may well be working, but how do you know that something a little bit different, inconsistent, marketing wise, may work even better? You won't know unless you try it. But it's definitely good. But it is good to have sort of a little bit of consistency with the initial approach to what you want to do. And if something is working, again, I definitely stick to it, but don't just think that's the be and end all. Like, okay, this thing's working. No, keep trying to improve and develop on it. Think, how can you escalate? How can you take it even bigger? What are the possibilities? Don't just think it's glued and set in place,
Yeah. No, I love that you say that because I think all of us listening here understand the importance of that consistency has, but it can be applied in different ways. Where if you consistently, let's say, post a blog post or a devlog or something like that, that's great. That action can be very helpful. But let's say you just post the same content every day. It's just like,
Yeah.
hey, here's this update or whatever, and you get the same results, and whether they're poor or awesome, then you I think through that level of consistency, which is important, you get conditioned, right? Like kind of like what you're saying. You're like, oh yeah, it works. We're good with this. We'll keep churning the machine. But then what you're saying is then there's a level of unconsistency in terms of the experimentation. That's where the creativity starts coming out and everything else. It's like, hey, I got my baseline. I know these things, but now what if we try this? And you know what? That's what I think what you were alluding to before with like that's the creative and the exciting part and the fun part that comes with marketing.
Yeah.
It's like we did this, but you tell me but that's what I'm guessing from what you were saying.
Yeah, no, that's it, definitely. So basically, learn the everything I think has a general rule of thumb in life. There's a fundamental sort of pathway that you follow, that you can follow. And again, so in marketing, it's follow that path, but don't think it's the only path that as you walk down, it starts branching off. Don't just walk down that same path. Just be a little bit brave. Try these different paths. Try this. Try that. You said tried. Okay, should I talk about this different in my blog? Should I post a completely different gameplay footage? Should I do a developer sort of type of video with a voiceover? Don't just stick to the same thing. Follow the fundamentals, the basic stuff, and any indie dev can just do any type of online search to find that, and then go with sort of your gut and experiment.
I love it.
I keep saying it, but I just think it's so important. I really do believe in just have fun with it, be brave and be creative. Like, yes, follow the fundamentals, but please don't get bogged down too much with things that you read and things that could potentially put you off from doing things which could work wonders for your game. Again, you don't know unless you try.
I love that. And, with that last explanation, I want to kind of shift the topic a little bit here, but also dive into what you were sharing before in terms of like focusing on ways to get creative with strategies, because we're definitely going in that direction right now. But one thing that occurred to me and I was thinking about is like, hey, this all sounds great and everything else, but sometimes people might look at some of these marketing strategies or whatever with, let's say, a limited mindset in terms that they kind of let their mindset dictate their decision on whether it can be effective or even done. And there could be any number of reasons like, oh, I don't have the time for that, or, oh, this person already did that, or, I can't do this, or I don't think this will work, is really the generalized mindset sometimes people have. So when that happens, and I'm sure you're up against this all the time, and trying to find ways to combat and look at things differently, what would you say is a good way to keep that open mind about something you may already feel you know the answer to, especially if it's a negative one?
So, I will use me as an example. When I've not had the time to, or if I felt like I've not had the time to market games on, in whatever way or whatever platforms, I've had to get my head stuck down and be laser focused and be like, okay, let's be realistic here. What if I can't have my hands in every pocket, so to speak? Which pocket am I gonna? Where is my forte? Like, what am I best at? And I think if you can focus on what you're best at, that's where the priority should be. And that may well be, somebody might say, well, again, I don't have time. It's just two guys developing this game. Well, then I would say, don't look too much into the marketing. If your forte is the game itself and you believe it's really good, it looks visually amazing, this and that, let the game do its talking. And again, have fun with it. I mean, Andrew, you've probably seen on like Twitter, for example, a lot of devs, they'll just do work in progress little videos that gain loads of traction. There's a particular developer, I can't remember his name now, who literally, there's no sort of marketing hook or copy. It's just, it's basically like a dev log, and he gets thousands of likes every time. And I'm sure he did an interview at one point, I can't remember the game, and basically he found it difficult trying to have a set strategy in place. So he thought, well, I'm very good at, I know how to sell the game, but I don't know sort of how to market it. But what I can do is show the game in my way. So his way was, again, just work in progress stuff. And that worked for him. I had a talk about that once, actually, and someone said to me, what would you tell people who have success? What would you, with marketing, what would you tell them? And my answer was, well, if it's working for them in their personal, I'm talking in the realms of with the context now. If something's working within your life for you, for example, the time you have spare and the energy you can put into it, then be careful how much you do change, because if it is working for you within your life guidelines, you could find that if you try and incorporate too much more stuff, the pressure is just going to mountain on, and you're not going to enjoy it.
Yeah, I those are some very, I would say, wise words there too, because it's like we can get so caught up in these details sometimes, or everything else that's going around, and if we just don't simply take a moment, step back, and rely on our strengths, we're essentially making more work for ourselves.
Yeah.
So I really like that you shared that, and a good way to essentially approach like that potentially limited mindset we sometimes have with ourselves, and just, again, like you said, look in your pocket, see what you're really good at, and then strive to do that. And then from there, I would assume that's when you start seeing more of that creativity and stuff, because sometimes it's what I like to do. And a great example for this too is somewhat relative, is like, Ken Levine with BioShock, and even Silent Hill. That whole thing, Ken Levine with BioShock was based off, let's have limitations and make the most out of them type situation, and they did. And then Same with Silent Hill. We wanted this whole open world, but we couldn't because I think what was the PlayStation had that system limitations. But instead, it made for a 10 times more creepier and awesome game by limiting that stuff. But again, through limitations, they were able to be creative in these aspects, and taking that and applying it here, I think, again, is just such a great example that you showcased with us. With that, because I want to shift things a little bit too, because this is something that's important, and I think it's definitely worth discussing a little bit here too. Where, I would say it's probably definitely important to be aware of, the market or even your community to find new opportunities. So how can you take that information, like knowing what's going on in the market or certain social communities or things like that, and how can they be turned into effective strategies? And I would love you to, if you have other examples, great, but I'd love you to share a recent example that you had success with using Twitter. So how important is it to be aware of the market community, and how can this awareness help you create effective strategies?
So I think it's very important, or probably beneficial is the better word to use here. But yeah, to give an example, I mean, with Hypercharge, I never, so in terms of being aware of the community, I never fully realized up until the last year, less than a year really, that Hypercharge had a massive fan base from the Xbox community. And it was only through trial and error and testing, again being creative on Twitter, with great videos with good copy and hooks, and really trying to see, okay, what's out there in terms of players and communities, who would this game resonate well with a different audience. And with Hypercharge, I did exactly that, and oh boy, did it resonate hugely. One thing that I think it's a really important thing you've mentioned, because if I would never have dared, there's two important things really. Like, the question is really good, because if I had never have pushed myself and was bold enough to try and do and did what I did with on Twitter, and it sounds really simple, it is and it's not, but I never would have realized we had a massive vocal player base out, a coming soon player base, because Hypercharge isn't out on Xbox yet. But yeah, I can talk more into Hypercharge and how that happened, but that's where we want to go with it. But
yeah, no, I think doing that is going to provide some additional context to what you just shared too. And provide a kind of a solid example. So yeah, I mean, and this is Hypercharge and what you were doing with Twitter, correct?
Yes.
So yeah, let's dive into there with what you did. I know you talked with Chris Zukowski about it too and shared some of the details. But yeah, bring that up here for some context, because I think that will be helpful.
So for context, so it's going to be a timeline thing again. So after we had launched Hypercharge on Steam in 2020, and just again for further context, because it's relevant to the story, Hypercharge is a game about action figures. You play as action figures. It's all about nostalgia and taking you back to your childhood, younger self. Basically, it's just an awesome. I call Hypercharge. It's not just a game; it's an experience, and it sounds corny but it truly is. Like, it literally is like a time capsule, a time machine.
And is this I'm sorry, is this a like 3D like FPS, first person shooter?
Yeah, so it's a third and first person shooter. Yeah,
got it.
It's quite a few things. It's a wave based, and then building mechanics. It's so many genres. It's very it's a hard game to market. Any people who know the game will realize what I mean. But yeah, there's so much to it. But essentially, it's a third and third person wave-based shooter where you play as action figures. So yeah, in 2020, I think it was in 2021 at the back end. So we always knew we'd launch on Xbox, and I had this idea of right, okay then. The online world, I always like to. That Hypercharge has gone viral in the past, and I think this is important to also mention. If any developers ever had their game go viral, I think we have this tendency to think the whole world's seen it, and then you kind of step off the gas a little bit. But in actuality, if I imagine it as an ocean, you're this tiny, tiny, tiny little speck that's made a tiny, tiny splash. And there's so many people who haven't actually seen that clip or your game. It's just, we think it's like that hope syndrome thing, like where you think you're going to win the lottery. Like when something goes viral, you think everybody's seeing it and this is it, but it's not the case. Like nobody's actually seeing it. If you had it on a percentile, it's probably like 0.0.1% of people seeing it. So in this case, I realized that, right, we've gone viral a few times, but again, nobody knows of Hypercharge. Nobody knows it exists. So what can we do to try and make the game gain awareness? So again, we knew we were going to launch an Xbox. So I had the idea, right, I'm getting kind of good on Twitter with marketing. I'm understanding a little bit about hashtags and trends and whatnot. So I thought, you know what, I'm just going to post a tweet, an Xbox-centric tweet, that basically just announces, hey, Xbox players, we're making this cool game about action figures, and had an awesome video clip. And I thought, I'll just throw it out. Again, I didn't dive deep into what time I should do it. I didn't really dive so deep into the tweet itself. Again, I never schedule any posts. Personally, for me, I find that demotivates me because I focus on actually sticking to a schedule and just posting content on Monday, Tuesday, etc., versus being in the moment and pushing myself to be inspired and forcing myself to be creative. So I think that's one of the reasons why I do well on Twitter. But going back to the initial point, I did the tweet, and this particular tweet did pretty well. So this isn't the mega viral tweet that I had an interview with Chris about. Again, this was back in 2021. And what had happened is thousands of Xbox fans went wild. They were like, oh, wow, yeah, we want to play this game, this, that. And I was like, okay, then. That's cool. And then for the next, up until maybe April, I kept doing these Xbox-focused tweets. It wasn't so much a marketing campaign. It was me just literally learning about Twitter, how it works. And I was getting a bit more my head stuck in, okay, I'm realizing at this time it gets a lot of traction with Xbox fans. And then I started to understand more how hashtags work. So I always understood, I was aware of trends on Twitter. So I think most people will know what trends are. Basically, on Twitter, you have a trends feed, and it's basically very popular topics that start to trend, and it appears on essentially your front page of Twitter, depending how you've set up your privacy settings. But that's the gist of it. So I started to see... I already had trends like gaming would come up, or Steam would come up. And then I started to think, you know what? How can I edit this? How can I see when Xbox starts to trend? So I worked out that you can actually do there's a lot of customization in Twitter, and you can really edit what you see and push what you see. So, for example, I've got my feed is so Xbox related, like Xbox Series X, Xbox Series S, Xbox, and just very Xbox focused. So my idea was, right, and this is going into sort of 2022 now, I thought, right, I'm going to test another tweet out, and jump onto a trending hashtag because there's a reason the trending. And I basically did a post, saw Xbox, just for example, Xbox was trending. I made a post with the hashtag Xbox and tweeted that out. And again, that did really well this time, better than other posts. I thought, okay, then something must be connected here. I've jumped onto this trending topic at the right time. So then what I experimented with further was, okay, hashtags and keywords, are they the same thing? So you have a hashtag. So you could have, for example, Xbox as a keyword, no hashtag. Then you could have hashtag Xbox. Technically speaking, on that platform, they're the same thing. So what meaning you don't have to, a word doesn't have to trend with it being solely a hashtag. A topic can trend if it's just the word Xbox. It's all dependent on how many times said word or topic is spoken about. So Xbox Series S was trending. I think it was in April 2022. And I jumped on it at the right time. And I literally just, organically incorporated it into the tweet. Like, hey, Xbox players, would you like to play our action figure game on Xbox Series S? Again, no hashtag. And that did really, really well. And then at this point, I was like, right, okay, we have Xbox are definitely the majority of, like, the very vocal majority here. And then I started to understand, well, it's probably because the type of game Hypercharge is. And again, it sounds silly, but I didn't really connect the dots at the time. Like, Hypercharge supports split screen, local co-op, PvP. It's got player bots. It's very, like, suitable for the Xbox versus, if you're going to go and play a game with your family in the living room, it's much easier to load the Xbox up and play split screen versus going into an office and trying to set it all up on Steam. It's much easier on a console. And then with the whole nostalgic side of Hypercharge, that resonates well with Xbox and the console. So I just really realized, it suddenly just hit me. Wow, Hypercharge is tailor-made for Xbox. And again, if I hadn't dived into the Twitter side of things, and this never really would have clicked with me at the time. And then what happened is, I did another tweet with a really good, after all that I'd learned, did another tweet, jumped onto a trending topic. And again, I'd done dozens of tweets up until this point. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to start doing an Xbox marketing campaign. I set up a MailChimp newsletter, Xbox focused again. I changed the bio on Twitter, basically making it all about our game is coming to Xbox soon. So it was essentially a new game to players who have never seen it before. It'll be a new experience. And that did this tweet. This is the context with the interview with Chris. This was all about this particular tweet. The tweet, it was a really organic tweet. I had no paid influencers or journalists. There was nothing like that. I just used what I'd learned from being creative, put it out there, and it went massively viral. I think it got over 450,000 likes, 13 million views, and it just spiraled out of control. People were saying it was like the Hypercharge was like the front page of the internet. I will admit, I do think everybody saw it then, that particular week. It was just crazy. But going back to the question, like, if I hadn't have done that, I would have never have understood our community or this new community, this audience, these players. And it helped me. Again, when I said marketing and game development are integral or connected to each other, like that marketing side of things with the understanding the audience made me understand more about the game as well. Like, actually, this game resonates in a certain way with a certain demographic. And I learned so much from it.
Wow. I mean,
it's a complicated story, and I'm saying it's simple, but
it's okay. No, I mean, thank you for sharing that. Yes, there's a lot to unpack there, but what I'll do is doing that a little bit. One, you started up going with this initial mindset, and I think this is a great one because we forget this a lot. Think of, like you said, the ocean, and you're one person just making a tiny little splash, and I think that analogy is perfect because let's say you're in the ocean, and you're treading water. It's a lot of work to tread water for a very long period of time. And let's say if you're in the middle of the ocean treading water, there's a good chance no one's going to see you. But we think in our minds that, like, wow, I've been so busy treading water this whole time. It's very, it's draining. It can now, after doing it for so long, emotional and everything. And yet no one sees me. And okay, maybe it might be a little bit dark, but it's a very true, I think, a good example. It's like you're doing all this work, but no one else is seeing it. So I love that you filled in with it, because sometimes we get caught in busy work or just work in general and think, why aren't more people seeing this? But when you think of things as, like you provided that example with the ocean, it's hard to see. But getting back to those specific examples with Twitter and how everything started slowly coming, and this is a point that I have made in an article I've written, which is simply like, hey, when you're getting too familiar with the platform, know your platform, right? But I love how you positioned yourself and how you walked us through your process where you got to know the platform. You were really spending time and energy to know it. But instead of just knowing the platform and getting it all down to the nitty-gritty stuff that sometimes I think a lot of us like to do, like, oh, what's the best time? And so should I schedule a post? Should I be waking up at like 5 a.m.? Or any number of things that we do to kind of like game the system, if you will. You took the extra effort to know the platform. And in this case, it was Twitter that you got to know. And then you started to understand what your focus was. And yes, it's obviously we want to get in front of players, but you're like, hey, I'm noticing something here with the community in Xbox. How about I get to know them more? And then you start tailoring your feed. You start doing all these things. And through that process, that learning process, you start becoming creative, but and still, if you think about it, yes, it took some time to do these things. Yes, it took some time to learn these things. But the process itself is simple. You picked the platform, you started becoming familiar with it, and then you're like, how can I make this work better for my purposes based off of what I know? What you knew is, hey, there's a community around Xbox. And then you kept tailoring those tweets to that to the point where it blew up like it did. So I really think that's awesome how you... I know it was a long answer, but a good one, because sometimes I think we forget how much is really involved with that. And when we state these things later, sometimes it's like, oh yeah, that's easy, but it is and it isn't. The concept is easy, but then the execution is where the challenge lies, but also where the creativity can come from, and the fun of it all, even if it did take quite a while to get to that point. But I mean, I think you even open too. It's like, no, and plus your story relates to this too. No one's like ever an overnight success. There's always going to be that process, and sometimes taking the simple path there is a better way. It might be longer, but a better way than just spinning our tires with all the details.
Yeah, no, it's a really good a good way to summarize it. I think Chris even said in the blog that he thought Twitter had bad conversions and was pretty much not worth so much time in terms of getting those conversions, wish lists and impressions or whatever. And he said, but Joe found like a formula. And it was funny because the next day when he posted that blog, somebody tried it for the first time and it worked, and he got the highest amount of engagement he ever had on his tweets. And it's amazed me, Andrew. I thought, again, it's such... What is that saying? Simplicity is key, and I don't like... I'll do a nicer phrase, but keep it simple. Keep it simple and straightforward. That saying. And I think it's so true of that, and it's getting it in our industry in terms of marketing, where there's so much conflicting information. This is exactly what I think's happened on Twitter, and Chris kind of admitted it himself, is that because everybody was sticking to the same thing, particularly on Twitter, because they thought that was the norm. Again, it's like the herd of sheep analogy. You see the herd of sheep, and there's one sheep who's on his own going through the gate, and he's looking at the rest of the sheep. No, and then the herd are looking at him thinking, "You're weird," but really, it's like the herd is the weird. So what I'm meaning is, I was kind of like that sheep who went out of the norm of things. I wasn't just sticking to wishlist Wednesdays and screenshot Saturdays and assuming hashtags was the only thing. I actually took myself out of my comfort zone and inspired myself, really, because each time I saw something was happening, it does spark creativity. And again, if I would just to schedule tweets, like you said earlier, and just stuck to kind of what I know and what kind of worked, this would never have happened with Hypercharge. And again, that tweet that I did will go viral. That made, in marketing terms, it was a second launch for Hypercharge. It sold more copies last month than we did in our 2020 launch on Steam. So, like, I'm not saying this can happen for every game, but as marketing consultants, I think you'll agree here, Andrew, our job is to increase the chance that your game will be successful or your game will be seen. Obviously, success is subjective, but I'm always looking at how can I increase your chance that people will know your game exists, and that's what I write about a lot. Always trying to increase that chance, because it's all still a chance. It's all, again, yes. It was luck that the right person did see that tweet at the right time. I didn't plan it, but then you could argue if I did plan it, maybe he wouldn't have seen it.
Right, exactly. And it's I mean, because we say too, there's definitely going to be some luck involved, but what I would counter to that, for if it's coming from a negative perspective, is simply, but why don't we then just create our own luck? Because
that's wonderfully worded.
So no, really great points, and everything else, and just, oh man, I
apologize if I'll be honest, I'm not the best at telling stories, so I apologize if it's going.
Worry about
if it's going really on and off. The last month I've done I think over like 12, I don't know, over a dozen podcasts as well, and it's been, my mind is a bit frazzled with everything that's happened with the game, because it is been the interviews, and it's been a success for that game, and a lot of it was because of the magazine. So I've been like, I've got so much information in my head, and I'm not my fiance. She always says I am the worst at telling stories. So I do apologize, well, Andrew.
Joe,
and I'm even worse if I don't like to plan for them as well. I'm terrible if I plan for things. I'm so better when I just dive in. Honestly, like, I'm comfortable doing that, but I'm not good at telling stories.
Don't worry about it. I think what you were able to share with us and everything else was just extremely insightful, and I'm glad you went to the length and depth that you did, because again, these things are important to hear, and a lot of times when they don't come out as organically, like, let's say we were writing content and we're trying to finesse things and keep it short and simple and easy for people to digest, to move on to the next 20 things that they're doing. Sometimes these conversations, I think, are warranted to have to this degree. So no need to apologize there. But with that said, I know that we are coming on time here. So before we leave and as we start to close, I'd love for you to share maybe like 3 suggestions or tips that you would recommend people listening today about our conversation and how to be creative with your strategy.
So one tip, I like to see it as a tip, is that I look at marketing as a form of art. And that's when it comes into, it's creative, it's volatile, there's a lot of luck involved. But if you look at it in terms of an art form, because I really truly believe it is, and if you're a painter, you'll try different colors, you'll try different canvases, you'll try different sceneries. You'll try and force your look, force your creativity, and rather than looking at it as just broad data on an Excel sheet and thinking I have to do A, B, C, and D, and thinking outside the box, create your own shapes, try things. Again, if you go and read the the article on Chris's blog, How to Go Viral on Twitter, it goes in great depth. That's a perfect example, and what we've just spoke about, Andrew, of why being creative can work. So look at marketing as a form of art. And a second point I would say is don't assume that if something doesn't work for a particular game, it doesn't mean that it won't work for yours. So don't let somebody's fortune be the ultimatum of stopping you from trying it. Because again, it may work for you. For example, if a developer saw how a particular studio marketed their game in a broad sense, I'm talking here, and they liked it because it resonated with their game, or their sort of idea, but it didn't work so well for them. Try and pull ideas from what they did. If you think it's going to work for yours, don't just assume because they didn't it wasn't successful for them that it may not be successful for you. And the third point relates to this is, and I think this is important. Success is subjective, and that also goes to a deeper point of, yes, have expectations in terms of the scope of your games and how you want to market them. So is your success defined by that you want to make $100,000 in the first week, or is it defined by you want to be able to say you launched a game regardless of how financially viable it was? So what I mean by that is be realistic with the be realistic, with the scope of the game. So if you're just an indie developer starting out, and you don't have much experience in marketing, I probably wouldn't go deep in there and try and create a massively open world game that's going to create 6 years. Start small, have fun with it though, be creative, but start small and build your way up. You don't have to. You don't have to. It's a fourth point. You don't have to just jump into the deep end. You can still see the deep end from the shallow end. You can have a good look.
I love that outlook.
So yeah, that's my tip. So a little bit philosophical, but I think it's relevant.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. Definitely helpful tips there, but all that are a great way to shine even a little bit more light when we considering everything else that we talked about today. So thank you so much, Joe. And again, before we go, how can people get in touch with you? How can they find out more about Indie Game Joe, the website, what you do? What are some links that you can share with us?
So I'm starting to get more active on Twitter. My handle for that is Twitter at Indie Game Joe. And I have a website, indiegamejoe.com. There's also a blog section, which has got quite a few detailed articles on there, all about indie game marketing. I've also got quite a few more blogs in the process. And I'm also on LinkedIn. If there's anybody on there, just search Joe Henson or Indie Game Joe, and I'm sure I'll come up there. And if anybody does want to reach out directly, my email is info@indiegamejoe.com.
All right. Well, folks, you heard it. So if you have any ideas or just want to get in touch with Joe to kind of run some ideas or some creative suggestions or things that you're kind of stewing in your brain, for a fact after today that Joe's the guy to go to. So, Joe, thank you so much. It's been an honor to have you on the show and really diving into the extent that you did to share how you go about your creative marketing process. So thanks so much for being on the show.
Yeah, no, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Hey everyone, thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. If you enjoy and value the show's content, you can support us even more by going to Patreon and visiting www.patreon.com/IGM podcast and select the tier that best suits your needs. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com, the number episode of the show. Rengen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. Whether you need guidance with your game's marketing strategy or could use a free marketing plan template, then please visit www.rengenmarketing.com and take action. A special thanks to Dakota Saw for Season 2's opening theme and Melissa Gellis for the new logo design. And as always, thanks for being such great listeners, and we'll see you next time on Indie Game Movement.